Okay, sorry everybody. My technology skills are lacking. Turn this off. Okay, welcome. Welcome to our final symposium of this, I guess it would be spring. Is that right?
Yes.
Winter, spring.
Pre-summer?
Yes, pre-summer. We've had a good run of symposiums. Gary's here who presented, Pastor Mara. We've had some wonderful Saturdays, and this is going to be a really good night tonight. So I'm excited for this. Welcome to those of you who are new. Connie, good to have you with us. And I think have you been before?
No, not today.
Welcome, nice to see you.
Yeah.
Great to have you with us. So I was trying to memorize the title, and I only got half of it. But I want to introduce it right. So you all know, if you don't know John, John is the husband of Sarah and the father of 3 wonderful boys. He's also an educator. He's an Anglican. And he's also one of our choir scholars in our church choir. He's a wonderful voice, which you'll hear tonight. Sarah as well. And so his presentation tonight, if you want to introduce.
Yes, this is Mariana Salo.
Marianne, nice to have you.
Mariana.
Yes, nice to see you. So beautiful and mysterious, visions of Christ and his church in the 5 mystical songs of George Herbert and Ralph Vaughan Williams. I love Christ, church, mystical songs, and of course I love George Herbert and Ralph Vaughan Williams. So without any further ado, I will turn it over to you, Mr.
Thank you.
John, please.
Well, start just with a brief explanation of the how this came about. Father Michael asked me if I would present a symposium, so I said yes, and then I started thinking about what I might talk about. And these songs, it is 5 songs by Vaughan Williams, are songs that I have sung certain ones over the years, but I've never sung all of them together. But they've been ones that have really just stuck with me over the years. They keep coming back to mind. I will listen to them from time to time or sing through portions of them. They've been really just rich and meaningful, but I've never really done a real kind of deep study into them. So I thought that might be a good place to start. And I was listening to an audiobook with my family. It's one that our boys have really loved and we've all loved as well. It's a series called The Incorrigible Children of Ashton Place. And one of the children in the story is very artistically minded. And so there's a scene where he is gazing out over the ocean for the first time, and he just says, "It's so beautiful and mysterious." And I thought, oh, that's a really poignant observation. And as an educator, as a music educator in a classical school, we talk a lot about truth, goodness, and beauty. And beauty, I think, tends to be one of those things that's a little bit hard to nail down or define. And as I was reflecting on that line from the book, I thought there is, I think, an element of mystery in all things that are beautiful. We sense that they're beautiful. We love them, but it's a little bit hard to nail down or to pin down exactly what makes something so beautiful. So as I was going through this, another key influence in this presentation was a book that I actually came across by perusing this library over here. I came across an author who's written on music named Rob Capellau, and he wrote a book called What Makes It Great, and he took short pieces of classical music and then kind of did an analysis that was accessible and kind of went through them, explained about what made those pieces really remarkable, and provided listening examples. So I thought, I may just model this symposium kind of after that. So I'm going to give you just a quick rundown of what to expect. So I'm going to start with a couple of brief biographies of the poet and the composer. We'll then do just a very light poetic analysis of the poetry that you have in front of you. We'll do a more extensive musical analysis. That's my area of interest, more than poetry, although I do love poetry as well. And then I'm going to give a performance of the songs with an annotated score, meaning you'll see the music in front of you if you would like to use that as a guide to listening, with my notes in it as well to kind of help guide your listening. And my wife Sarah is going to graciously help with slides while that portion is going on. So And then if we have time, hopefully we'll have time for a little bit of questions and discussion. My boys are all here, and their constant gaze reminds me that I need to be quick and not go too long. So we'll get right to it. So here's a picture of George Herbert. George Herbert was an English poet, born in 1593, died in 1633. He was a contemporary of the poet John Donne. And one of his main kind of passions in life was kind of reclaiming poetry for Christ and for the gospel. And rather than writing love poetry to a lover, he kind of took that and wrote lots of wonderful devotional poetry to the Lord, and is considered one of the first great English poets. He was born in Wales on April 3rd, 1593. His father died when he was very young, which have that note in there because it's consistent with the composer as well. Both of them had that experience in their childhood. He went to Trinity College in Cambridge and held the position of college orator, meaning he was in charge of giving speeches when that was called upon. So he was very successful academically as he went through his life. His poetry, as I mentioned, focuses on the mysterious kind of power of Christ. There's tons of just beautiful images of Christ, which we'll see here as we look at the poetry in a few moments. He did struggle with health his entire life. He was kind of constantly dealing with various ailments and things, but at some point decided to leave the academic realm and go into church ministry. So he was ordained as a deacon in 1624, and then was married shortly after that, and then ordained as a priest in 1630, and he served as a priest for 3 years before he passed in 1633. His kind of main contribution to poetry was a collection called The Temple, and it was published after his death in 1633, although he left notes that were kind of obvious that he was preparing this set of poems for publication, but it did not actually happen until after he passed. All the poems that you'll hear tonight come from this work. A little bit about Vaughn Williams. One interesting note that I love about him is that his first name looks like Ralph, but it's pronounced Rafe. And I'm not sure, I've never met anyone with that spelling or pronunciation, but Rafe Vaughn Williams is how his name was pronounced. And this is a picture of him, an actual photograph, so he was much later in history than Herbert. You see him in a military uniform. He did serve during World War I. But a few notes about him. He was born in 1872 in a town called Down Ampney. His father was a vicar of the parish, and interestingly served, before Vaughn Williams was born, actually served in the same parish church that Herbert had served in as a priest as well. So there's this real kind of strong location connection there. But his father died when he was 3 in 1875. He composed his first piece at the age of 6, so Joey, get cracking. That's how old he was when he wrote his first piece of music. So he was a child prodigy. He was very gifted as a young child, and violin was his main instrument, as well as the organ. He wanted to really pursue the violin, but got a lot of encouragement from his mother, I think wisely, to pursue the organ as well, as that ended up serving him very well later on. He married at age 25 in 1897. He was the editor of the English hymnal that was published in the beginning of the 20th century, and was a very strong contributor to English hymn, both writing hymn tunes and arranging a lot of the hymns. If you flip through our hymnal, you'll see his name quite a bit as you go through. He had a couple of really strong professional successes musically in 1910 with kind of major orchestral works, which led a group to commission from him a piece of music, and so he chose for that commission 5 mystical songs, which is what we're going to hear today. And he did serve in World War I prior to his death, and that's a little bit about him. So what I'd like to do now is take a look at the poetry, and you can refer to your sheets there if you will. It will be up here as well. A couple interesting notes about Herbert and his poetry. Many poets would take forms and then write many versions of following that same meter or form, sonnets or things like that. But in his poems, there's no repetition of form. Each poem had its own unique meter, structure, and form. He was constantly kind of creating new things as he went. The other thing that he did, one of the first to do, was be real intentional with his typographical shaping, and I'm going to show you an illustration of that, meaning that how the words were actually laid out on the page had meaning as well in terms of that, which is part of the reason why, as I've printed these out for you, the spacing looks a little odd. I wanted to stay true to his original spacing. But this is an example of a poem. It's not one of the 5 that we'll look at, but it's called Easter Wings. And I'm showing it to you just so you get a sense of the way that he structured the poem actually gives the image of wings and visually as well. And so it really, you kind of lose that image if you kind of bring everything over to the left. But he was really intentional with how things looked in that sense of meaning in his shaping. So the 5 excerpts that we have today are all from The Temple, which is this collection of poems that he wrote. And what's interesting about them is that he didn't publish these 5 together. Vaughn Williams kind of picked and chose his 5 that he wanted to set as this group of songs. So the ones that we'll look at today are kind of Vaughn Williams' choices, and some of the things that I'll point out are relating to kind of why Vaughn Williams chose these particular poems to put together. So the first poem is called Easter, and it's a long one. It looks like this, and we're actually going to cut it in half, and we'll look at the first half of it together. But I wanted you to see visually that the first 3 stanzas have all the same kind of shape and construction, and then the last 3 have a different one. And so when Vaughn Williams took this poem, he decided not to set it as one continual song, but he split it into 2. So his first song he actually titled Easter, just like the title of this one, and then the second one he gave a separate title and a completely different musical setting. So a couple of interesting things about this poem in particular. If you look at the 3 stanzas together, the first 2 stanzas kind of refer to the heart and then the lute, and these 2 things are important elements here in the poem. The third stanza we'll get to here in a minute actually addresses both of those things. So he starts with the heart, he then moves to the lute, a musical instrument, and then the third stanza combines those 2 together and talks about how those 2 things should work together in concert. He also gives a command to each of these things. So the heart, the command is then given to sing his praise. The lute is commanded to struggle for its part in terms of the creation of music, and acknowledging that takes work and effort. And then the harp and lute together are commanded to kind of twist a song. Again, it's this idea of work and labor to produce the praises of the Lord together. But the end of the poem here acknowledges that, well, prior to the end, the other slightly interesting thing here is this line, or since all music is but 3 parts vied and multiplied. So he's acknowledging here that music has a kind of 3-part structure. Chords are built of 3 notes that are then kind of combined and multiplied out to create music. But there's only 2 elements here. The heart and the lute are the only 2 that are referenced here. And so he then calls upon the Spirit to kind of add that 3rd part and then actually make our praises worthy and beautiful to the Lord. And these elements here are also really important in Vaughn Williams' musical setting as well. So a little bit there on the first poem. The second half of this poem, again, is still part of the same poem of Herbert, but a separate song by Vaughn Williams. So important images here in this song are this idea of throwing or kind of strewing flowers. And in Vaughn Williams' setting, the word is changed to strew, the kind of past tense of kind of throwing out. And musically, we'll see that image pretty strongly as well. He also kind of talks about this image of the east as the sun arises in the east. And more than just the direction of the east, he kind of calls upon this idea of the perfumes of the Orient, or the kind of beautiful smells that came from that. And musically, that also gets really strong treatment here in the second piece. this idea of perfume from the east. And then we've got this kind of first stanza of effort from us. I brought me flowers, I got me boughs off many a tree. The second stanza, the sun is doing the work to try and kind of create this sense of worth and value. And then in the final stanza, he realizes and acknowledges, really, can there be any day but this? Though many suns to shine endeavor, we count 300, that reference to the days of the year, but we miss, there is but one, and that one ever, which again is a reference back to the resurrection day, the day of Easter, the resurrection of Christ. And you'll see here as we get to the music that this last line gets a very dramatic treatment by Vaughn as well, really kind of driving home that point. All right, poem 3 is on the back of your sheet. This is probably my favorite of the three. I think it is the most, one of the richer poems of the set. And I'd love to just read the whole thing for you out loud. I think there's quite a bit here. So the poem reads, "Love bade me welcome, yet my soul drew back, guilty of dust and sin. But quick-eyed love, observing me grow slack from my first entrance in, drew nearer to me, sweetly questioning if I liked anything. A guest, I answered, worthy to be here. Love said, you shall be he. I, the unkind, ungrateful? Ah, my dear, I cannot look on thee. Love took my hand and smiling did reply, who made the eyes but I? Truth, Lord, but I have marred them. Let my shame go where it doth deserve. And know you not, says love, who bore the blame? My dear, then I will serve. You must sit down, says love, and taste my meat. So I did sit and eat." And in this poem, love is obviously a reference to Christ and this conversation between us and Christ regarding our really talking about our sense of unworthiness and I think the difficult struggle that we often have of receiving Christ and allowing ourselves to take his gift of salvation for ourselves. So a couple of things. This poem is full of kind of contrast, so these kind of pairings of things. So we have at the beginning, my soul drew back, and then love draws nearer to me. And then following that, the speaker talks about needing to find a worthy guest, and then he says, you shall be he. Contrasting kind of this argument going back and forth. And then the speaker says, I cannot look on thee. And then love says, who made the eyes? Who made the eyes but I? And then we've got this idea of shame, and then Christ saying, well, who bore the blame for it? That was me. The other interesting thing that one of the lovely things about being a part of this parish is that we read the King James Version of the Bible, and it was during one of our catechesis classes, I believe it was Father Michael read this passage, and I thought, oh, there's a poetic reference in the poem I'm going to be talking about here in a few weeks. And it's the story of the woman who comes and asks for help from Jesus, and the disciples are trying to push her away, and then even Christ says, are the dogs fit to eat at the table where the children are? And she says, truth, Lord. Yet the dogs eat of the crumbs which fell from the master's table. And then Jesus answered and said unto her, O woman, great is thy faith, be it unto thee even as thou wilt. And I think in this moment, Herbert poetically is quoting that woman who won this argument with Christ, right? He told her something and she said, it's true, Lord, but, and then he agreed and said, yes, you're right. And so here in a kind of twisted way, the speaker says, truth, Lord, but I have marred them, thinking now I'm going to actually win this argument with Christ, but then it doesn't here by the end. That was a really interesting use of that quotation. Then we have the idea of I will serve, and then Christ says, sit down. No, you're not going to serve. I'm going to do it. And then finally, the script flips, and Christ gets the command: you must sit down and taste my meat. and then finally, and I did sit and eat. And this moment here musically, which you'll see, is just one of the most glorious moments of the whole set of pieces. So look forward to that. All right, next poem, the fourth one, called The Call, has a few interesting elements here, and it's all based on sets of three. So you'll see here in the first stanza, come my way, my truth, my life. And then each of the following lines takes each of those words and expounds upon them. And we get the same thing that happens here in the second stanza, light, feast, and strength. Such a light as shows a feast, such a feast as mends in length, such a strength as makes his guest. And then in the final stanza, we get the same, again, this kind of reference to guest, which I think is part of the reason why Vaughn Williams kind of loved having this right after the previous poem where Christ kind of calls us to be his guest at his feast. And then in the third stanza, we get this element of three, but it's actually intensified here in the last line. So we have joy, love, and heart. Each one starts there, but then notice the last line includes all three of those one more time to kind of intensify and settle into this idea of threes. And again, part of the reason I'm talking about these elements of the poetry is musically these things are going to show back up. So we'll get back to the number three here when we get to that poem. The final poem in the set is actually set like a song. I'm not sure whether Herbert intended this to be set as a song or not, but he's obviously got chorus and verse. And one of the most important elements here in the music happens on this text, my God and King, this kind of final cry and affirmation of the lordship of Christ. The last thing to note is again just the reference here at the very end of this poem to, but above all, the heart must bear the longest part. And if you think back to the first poem of the set, the first thing that's said is, arise, heart, thy Lord is risen, sing his praise without delay. So he's drawing these connections between those poems here. The other interesting thing to note is the number of times the chorus arrives and the number of verses here. We've got a set of three and then a set of two, which again we'll get back to once we start looking at the music here in just a moment. So now we'll take a look at the music, and I'm going to do a quick time check to make sure that I am not going long, and it looks like I am, so I'm sorry. Gentlemen, we will move quickly through the musical examples here. So this is how the music is set up. This is what you're going to see as I sing. And so I'm just going to talk about and illustrate a few things here as we go through. But the piece begins with this series of B flats in the piano. The first note is just these octaves, and I'm going to just jump in real quick and play. So you have this repeated B flat, which then we would expect in the key of E flat, which is written in, to resolve to this, right? We get this strong here, and then a resolution there, which is really what happens in the voice. The singer sings, rise heart, and we get this nice strong resolution there. However, the piano plays this, which this note here in the bass should be this one. It's a strong sound. This one is not nearly as strong. And so we get this kind of immediate sense of things are not quite all settled, hence the need for the command to the heart to sing. So we've got this kind of false resolution here in the bass of the piano. And as the piece goes on, we've got these little melodic elements here, and this is where it gets a little bit technical, musically speaking, but I think this is an important aspect of it. This little melody here in the piano, just a very simple little three-note pattern, but as you look through the music, that pattern is everywhere. It pervades the entirety of the piece in ways that sometimes are very obvious and sometimes are very obscure. If you'll notice in the vocal part, we have the same, so it's still this, but it's extended with these decorated notes. And the text is, sing his praise without what? Without delays, but the melody is delayed as it goes through. So Vaughn Williams is kind of musically punning here on this little phrase by kind of extending and delaying that little musical figure. And if the first time you listen, you hear that, you wouldn't necessarily think anything of that little musical motive, but that's part of what makes great composers great, is that they weave these things in that then become apparent later on. So we get our first real settling into E flat major, the key of the piece, when we get to the line, "Who takes thee by the hands." This is Christ's first action. Finally, we're kind of arriving in this settled place. He gives us a nice little musical illustration of the word rise. The highest note of the piece that I will sing is on that note. And then we'll move on here. This little section, I didn't find anything terribly noteworthy that I thought would be helpful to share, so we'll move forward. But when we get here, you'll notice if you're looking at your poem, the text here from the beginning repeats. It's not repeated in the actual poem, but Vaughn Williams has chosen to reset it here with a slight adjustment in rhythm, but most of that is consistent musical material. And then the piano gets to play this beautiful introduction, or interlude, and it's actually a musical foreshadowing of something that comes later. The singer eventually sings to this melody, "Oh, let thy blessed spirit take a part and make up our defects with his sweet art." So it's almost as if Vaughn Williams is saying, the spirit is here, but the singer, the speaker doesn't recognize it yet. It won't really fully acknowledge that until later on in the music. Here we get a little bit of musical imitation that I've asked Mariana to play because I can't play well enough to illustrate this, but we've got a little strumming of the lute. Hear that kind of lute strumming sound. So even though it's a piano playing or an orchestra, he's illustrating that musically. And then another key melodic theme is this melody, "And struggle for thy part," which comes later, which I'll discuss here. But it's illustrative. Every time it arrives, it has something to do with man's working or attempting to work out things for himself. So then we get another example of strumming here. And then this, I think, is one of the most fun elements of this. And a lot of this observation, I meant to say at the beginning, we don't know that this is what Vaughn Williams was thinking, but we know how composers think, and this is actually pretty likely that these things are going on in his mind. Now, it's possible that some of these observations I'm making, if you were sitting here, he'd say, "Oh, I wasn't thinking about that at all." But I was actually reading a book by the poet Malcolm Guite, who's currently living, and he was reflecting on the fact that oftentimes people will interpret his poems in ways that he realizes are true, but he had no idea beforehand. So I think there are elements to that here. So when we get to the word cross, the music kind of shifts and settles into G major. And this key of G major has one sharp, and the sharp here is that little, it looks like a pound sign, which is a set of what? Crosses, right? So he's kind of illustrating that concept by the key signature. And then immediately, when we get to the phrase, "who bore the same," talking about Christ's sacrifice on the cross, it shifts into G minor, which goes from a bright, joyful tone to a dark, somber one. So we've got the shift into G minor here on that text. G minor uses the same key signature as B flat major. It's two flats. And so by the time we get to the text, "his stretched sinews taught all strings," this image of Christ out on the cross, we've got two flats, one for each hand outstretched on the cross. And the interesting thing about B flat is B flat almost always leads back into E flat major, which is the key of the piece. And he says, "What key is best to celebrate this most high day?" And E flat has three flats, and as we know, the number 3 is has a very Trinitarian context, and this idea that there is a kind of holy key to use is highlighted here. Right here, we've got that key change there in the music, that Trinitarian imagery. Now, once we get here, the piano shifts and plays this struggling melody, but it's flipped upside down, so we actually don't immediately recognize it unless you're doing an analysis of it, but it's still there, because the text here is "consort both heart and lute." So again, try your best, heart and lute. Struggle for this, make this happen as the opening material returns, but obviously it's not happening on their own. And then we get a return of this Christ motive here as we talk about twist a song, pleasant and long, but the singer doesn't match up with that at all. It's just heard in the piano part. And then I think one of the again, this musical little jokes by Vaughn, but when the text says, since all music is but 3 parts, 5 and multiplied, the accompaniment has these very clear 3-note triads. Each of these chords here is 3 notes stacked on top of each other, which we really don't have a whole lot of through the rest of the piece. And then when it says and multiplied, it then all of a sudden splits up into this kind of more extended, expanded writing through there. So again, he's giving us these musical images of the poetic text. And then the singer finishes up here, cadencing in a nice strong E flat. However, the piano does not. And the piano plays this kind of wild series of minor chords. It sounds like this. Finally clears to a major, but a very soft one, as if we're just not quite, we haven't quite arrived here at where we're going musically. So that leads us into the second piece, and the second piece begins, and actually, do you mind playing this little introduction, Marianne, for us? So it's almost like these petals of flowers are getting tossed out by the piano, this kind of illustration of that there. And then the melody here is something called a pentatonic scale, which at the time of Vaughn, their understanding of Eastern music was this pentatonic scale. If you listen to the music of Puccini, when he's writing music about the East, about China, it's all this pentatonic scale stuff. So he's musically kind of giving us a picture of the East by using these specific notes of the musical scale. Then we've got here a second kind of scattering of things, although when you hear it the second time and you think about the text that's coming, the sun arising in the east, it almost then starts to sound like this kind of peaking of the sun up above, this kind of brightening, slowly dawning music as it comes. Perhaps the sun can offer something worthy. And then we get this really fun kind of swinging incense melody as the singer sings, East perfume. The music swings up and then back. It's almost like this kind of swinging of the incense as it goes. And then here at the end, we get this dramatic key change. We've gone from 6 flats in E flat minor to 4 sharps in E major. It's a very bizarre key shift, which you'll hear in the music. And then at the end of this next section, another dramatic key shift back to 6 flats, but it's not a minor key. It's actually what's called the relative major of G flat major. So we've gone from E flat minor to E major and then to G flat major. And I'm just going to play that little progression here, which is that melody, which is actually the flip version of the Christ motive, which was, but it's upside down. So he's actually taken that melody that represents Christ and flipped it upside down and used that to structure his key changes in the second piece, which is, again, a way to give continuity to the music that we wouldn't necessarily perceive at first listen. There it is. And then the final line of the poem, we get this huge fortissimo of there is but one and that one ever, the piano and the singer singing together and play that very, very strongly and clearly. The third piece, Love Bade Me Welcome, begins with this kind of musical depiction of the hesitant entry of the speaker. So I'm going to have Marianne play this for us as well. Music stops, tries again, and now slowly kind of creeps in. So he's kind of giving us this, again, this kind of musical depiction of what the speaker or the singer is attempting to do through this section. And then all throughout this one, that melody, that Christ motive is really every time there's a reference to love, the Christ, that melody comes back in, and I've highlighted that where it comes. Then we've got another little melody that represents kind of unworthiness, and that I'll have highlighted there for you. You can hear that when it comes in the music. And again, this kind of extended Christ motive here on the "Ah, my dear, I cannot look on thee." And then we get, again, more of the Christ motive, and then the unworthiness motive when that text comes back. And then here at the end of this kind of main section, we have the Christ motive. When the singer seems to respond, "My dear, then I will serve," the piano is playing the unworthiness motive. Even though it seems like the singer is beginning to kind of acquiesce musically, we're not there yet. That tune comes back. And then the "I will serve" is the melody that represents struggle from the first piece. So it's this, okay, I can do it. I can do the work that maybe might make up for my own sin. We've got all of this happening here. And then we have another just kind of glorious key change from G flat minor into E major on the text. "You must sit down," says love. And at this point, the music for the rest of the set, all the other pieces, is all in major keys. So we never go back to minor. It's just it's as if this is the kind of turning point for that. The other fascinating thing about this section is in this moment, the piano is going to play in the full version. The choir would sing or hum the tune of "O Sacrum Convivium," which is an ancient medieval chant, the text of which is "O Sacred Banquet, wherein Christ is received," is the communion chant. And so this command, "You must sit down and taste my meat, so I did sit and eat," is accompanied by this kind of ethereal presentation of this old chant that I think many at his time would have been familiar with as a musical reference there. It's really quite stunning. And so the rest of that is just this kind of gorgeous accompaniment. There's a lot of music for the piano in that section to close out that piece. The last two pieces are relatively simple, and these will go quickly. If you recall, in this poem, we've got these series of threes, and Vaughn Williams really drives this home. The piece is in E flat, which is 3 flats. The melodic structure is based on the notes of a major triad, which is 3 notes. Bum, 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 the kind of central musical element. And then the meter is in 3, so the beats are grouped in groups of 3. So we've got 3 flats, 3 notes of the chord, and 3 beats in a measure. So it's really kind of musically giving us that, emphasizing that picture. The Christ melody is the kind of central moment. Each stanza has that same melodic reference there. And this one is just a lot of fun and pretty straightforward. So there's not much else I wanted to say about that. And then the last piece is in D major, and D major, when composers really want to write something triumphant or kind of signaling heaven, D major is often the key. Most famously, the Hallelujah chorus is set in D major. It's this kind of sense of heavenly triumph. So we're in D major. The 2 and the 3, the 3 refrains and then the 2 verses are played with here. The meter is in 3 beats per grouping, but then oftentimes the music is grouped in groups of 2. So we'll kind of feel 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2. So he's playing again with this idea of numbers in the poetry and going back and forth through that in that sense. We've got another sense here where usually you'll hear 4 bars of something and then the singer or the next section will start, but he's only got 3 and then the singer kind of jumps in here, emphasizing that sense of 3s. The cry of "My God and King" that you'll hear over and over again in this piece is a harmonized major key version of that Christ motive, that ba-da-dum. But it's all major chords, so bum, 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 bum. It's just hammered home over and over and over in this piece, which really makes, by the time we get here, we realize, oh, that theme, that little melodic pattern has been really important, and this is kind of where we finally see that in the music. We've got a little fun illustration of flying. The melody of the singer goes, "His praise may thither fly," so the music kind of flies and floats up. When we talk about the earth is not too low, the piano sinks down, drops almost a full octave, and the singer goes down to the bottom of the register. It's a little bit of just kind of musical fun here. And then the music slowly rises and grows. Again, the melody just steadily goes up through this section. I'm going to point that out. Then we've got opening material, but in the same key here. Again, this Christ melodic motive on my God and King. And then we'll see that same motive again, that same melodic motive. The church with psalms will shout, no door can keep them out. And then the piano hammers that same melody one more time, kind of echoing that Christ motive through here. And then we've got just another fun little musical wordplay on the word longest. That melody really stretches out to this very long, melodious thing through there. And we'll return to the main material, but in a lower key, in C major, and then he quickly gets us back up by reharmonizing that Christ motive, but still all of the key chords. And then we've got just one final statement of the refrain here. The piano and the voice line up, and it's just a very strong statement there. And then the last thing that we hear, I don't know if you recall all the way back in the first piece when she played that series of minor chords that was all ascending, and we got to that final resolution but didn't feel like it was quite set. So he takes that same pattern of chords, and at the end, he doesn't use minor, he uses major. So this is what it sounds like. So all of a sudden, where everything was minor in the first one, now everything is in this bright major, and we get this final sense of settledness here at the end. And that wraps up the set of songs. So, if it's all right with you, I'd love to sing them all for you. Sarah's going to help with the music. And I would encourage you, if you want to follow along and kind of note those things, great. If you find that distracting and you want to just follow the text, or if you want to just listen, that's also fine. I suggest doing kind of whatever allows you to really fully appreciate things to the best you can. Let me grab a sip of water here before we.
wretched sinuous total strings, what keys past to long, pleasant and long. Oh, since all music is but three parts, varied and multiplied, all let thy blessed Spirit bear apart, and make about effects with his sweet heart. I got me flowers to strew thy way. I got me boughs of many a tree, but thou wast up by break of day, and brought thy sweets along with thee. The sun arising in the east, though he give light and the east perfume, if they should offer to contest with thy arising, they presume. Can there be any day but this, for many suns to shine and ever? We count 300, but we miss. There is but one, and that one heaven. have mocked them, let my shame go when it doth deserve. And know you what says love, who bore the blame, my dear, then I will serve. You must sit down, says love, and taste my meat. So I did sit and eat. Come my way, my truth, my life, such a way as gives us breath, such a truth as ends our strife, such a life as killeth death. Come, my light, my feast, my strength, such a light as shows a feast, such a feast as mends in length, such a strength as makes his guest. Come, my joy, my love, my heart, such a joy as none can move, such a love
Thank you, Mariana. Yes.
Wow, please stand up. That's fantastic.
Sure.
A few questions? Any response or questions or thoughts that you'd like to offer? Before I ask
Thank
a
you
couple?
for that explanation as we went, because it certainly helped when you
Good.
sang.
Good.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. And on a personal note, how did you and Sarah meet?
We sang in choir together in college, and she stood right behind me. And during rehearsals, when she got bored, she would just poke me in the back.
Good for Sarah.
No, we met before then. We both studied music education, and so we were in the same classes.
Wow. Match made in heaven,
Glad you
I
asked that,
think.
'cause I didn't know that. Yes, Connie?
Can you find this music online?
Oh, yes.
So
Yes.
if I Google like the name of the.
Yes, and so the original version was for soloist and choir and orchestra, so you can find those, and the orchestration does even, you get a different sense of the music a little bit just based on what instruments it chooses to use, but then it published a version for just piano and soloist to do as well. And so the last piece actually is, in the original version is all chorus, the soloist doesn't even sing that final one, and it's a little bit more complex too as it goes. But yes, no, they're great recordings. A really good one, there's one of the King's College Choir in Cambridge, which doing it. I can't remember the soloist in that recording, but yes, no, they're everywhere. So.
Great job.
Marlene, then, go ahead.
You mentioned Matthew Guy, and I like him very much. Have you ever sung any of his poetry? Is any of his poetry put into music?
Sorry, who?
Malcolm Guy?
Malcolm Guite. I don't know. I'm not sure if his any of his poems have been set to music or not. That's a great question. I've gotten to hear him speak several times, and he's fantastic. So.
Gary?
John, you talked about the significance of key changes, but it didn't pick up anything about tempo changes. Is there significance to that as well as key changes?
I mean, I think so. I mean, I think there. I didn't, as I was looking through it, I didn't cue in on any of those. But there are moments of. I mean, each piece obviously has a kind of a separate tempo, and obviously that last piece is this kind of explosion of joy, and that the tempo really does have an effect on that. But no, Vaughn Williams is very particular in his markings about tempo and where the singer's supposed to breathe and all those things. And some composers don't dictate that as much, but his is very clear as this is where you're supposed to do different things and when you're supposed to take a little extra time and things like that. So he is very intentional. I didn't give a whole lot of thought to that in terms of the poetry, but I'm sure it's there.
Anybody else? Herbert?
John, you and your family are such gifts to this church.
Yes.
And I think I'm so grateful that the Lord gave the gift of music, because there are times that I think our worship would be incomplete without it. And I feel like the music always almost pulls us to where we need to be in our praise. And it's just so beautiful, the gifts that you bring to this church. So grateful.
Herbert has a poem called Church Music, where he kind of talks about the value of music, and he's got a great line. He's talking about music, and it says, "We both together live and love," so kind of his relationship with music. But then he says, "But say sometimes, God help poor kings." And he's referencing this sense that oftentimes, sometimes the words that we sing seem very kind of rudimentary and bare, but then can be elevated by the beauties of music.
I'm sure you've heard Vaughn Williams' The Lark Ascending, that song just it's like everything needs to rise. Like when I hear it, I can't sit down and listen to that song. You just have to elevate with the music.
Yeah. And his early, he has a lot of great music for both. His songs are just fantastic, and he's done a lot of songwriting. But then violin is another. I think probably related to his upbringing and that being one of his instruments. But yeah, a lot of great violin.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Anybody have another question? Because I'll be the last one if that's. So mine's two-part. So you start off by saying that this music is special to you.
Mm-hmm.
So there's two themes to me that are just jump off the page. One is gospel and grace, and then one is Eucharist.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want, what do you think of in relation to this when you think of grace and Eucharist? Pulling it out of this music.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously for Herbert and even for Vaughn Williams, that idea is central in the themes of the piece in the music. The idea of, I mean, that third poem, the conversation between us and Christ, I think is just so poignant, and even that the line, "You must sit down," says love, "and taste my meat." At first reading, you might say, "Oh, that this is just come taste the food that I've prepared for you." But then, when you think about my meat actually being the body of Christ Himself, it makes it so much deeper and richer. And it's funny, the first place I sang these, it was at a church, and we had just sang the first, second, and fourth, and they intentionally omitted the third piece because they were concerned about it was not an Anglican church, and they were concerned about the Eucharistic reference and how people would receive that. And so when I was told we weren't doing that piece, I was kind of heartbroken because it was my favorite one. I said, "Oh, well, I can't sing my favorite," but no, I think it is really strong.
Is there anything that you want to say, Miss Sarah?
No, I think John did a great job.
Thank you both so much.
Personally, extend a thank you to Mariana. You obviously realize this, but she had many more notes to play than I did.
Oh, yeah.
Duly noted.
Of course, you're all welcome to stay as long as you'd like. There's plenty. I think there's still food and drink. Please help yourself. Stay, mingle, and thank you all for coming. We'll resume the symposiums in the fall. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Great way to end this. Beautiful music. And if you're here long enough, you're going to see probably a beautiful sunset. So everyone's welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I picked up the glasses on the floor. Yeah, that's yours? Yeah. That's all right.